So I wanted to start by kind of just jumping in to the piece that you wrote and ask the kind of the big question, which is the Apple of 2024 in marked decline from where it was 5 years ago, say?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it depends on how you obviously, define a marked decline, but I think a lot of people would give credence to, two core things about Apple right now. One of which is that, just compared with earlier years and its like entire like 2000s era run, its earnings are definitely more stagnant than what they used to be before. It's still one of the world's most valuable companies, but shareholders have felt generally mixed about Apple in recent times. There's been a lot more zigzagging with the stock than you'd ever see before. And the other part of it is, whether you might be seeing some sort of cultural decline. And I think you could definitely, as I have, make the argument that Apple is definitely not so much at the vanguard of culture in tech or just like the broader pulses of American and global culture as it once used to be. I feel like moments like the introduction of iTunes or the introduction of the iPod and then subsequently the touch and the iPhone and everything, it was not those were not just like game changing inventions, but like, epoch defining inventions, basically, like, iPhones coming everywhere, iTunes becoming sort of a default for a lot of music consumption, organizing, at least for a long time. And Obviously, like the iPod changing the way that people, listen to music in the internet age. And I think what you're seeing now is that Apple puts forth fewer products that, well, one, are really new or innovative in the same way, or that really, redefine everything around it in the market and just in the broader culture. And like, it seems a lot of the time now that Apple is almost like playing catch up to the world around it. Apple Music only came along after Spotify had already been pretty entrenched on the screen and basically like announced that the future of music consumption is streaming, right? Um, and a lot of Apple's product line over the past few years has been like, okay, here's like a smartwatch, which is already a thing, but we're adding this and this and this to it. It's like a cool smartwatch. Or same thing with
Got it.
like
Yeah.
AirPods, yeah, exactly. Same thing with AirPods, it's like, all right, hey, we got our same, relative quality earbuds, but this time no cord. And that fits with our thing of no headphone jack on this or that device. So it feels like they're, but like even when they took out the headphone jack from iPhones, a lot of other phones. I don't have an iPhone, but I have a lot of Apple products. My current phone, still has a headphone jack. My MacBook Air that I'm talking to you on right now still has a headphone jack.
Thank God.
It's
Yeah.
not like they spelled the obsolescence of the jack in a way that maybe they might have, and if they had the same heft that they did in the aughts per se.
Right. Right. Well, but this question of being at the vanguard of technology is a kind of interesting one because it feels like, I guess, for the last 18 months, the vanguard of technology has been dominated by AI, where Apple is not perceived as a major player currently, and I'm sure that they have aspirations to space, etc. But equally, I see AI as being something that has relatively niche take up at the moment. And certainly Apple has always been such a consumer focused company. And, if they can teach my mum to use an iPod, great, they'll sell an iPod. But they're not going to teach my mum to use a chat GPT or a DALI equivalent. And therefore, possibly they're just not involved in that consumer bun fight currently. Is it just fair to say that like the cool technology at the moment is not consumer focused?
That's a really, really good question. I think it again also depends on how you approach a consumer focused. I There obviously are like a lot of ways ChatGPT has been used that maybe are not the ways that people would want it to be used, especially ChatGPT's makers at OpenAI themselves. But yeah, I do think so. There was a recent Bloomberg report that was interesting about, obviously Apple has been bugged by this AI thing now for the past year and a half or so. Whereas like obviously Microsoft, Google, Alphabet, Meta, all these other big tech companies really tried to like scramble and put whatever AI things they had in development, whether they were ready for not, kind of out there. Apple didn't really have the same sort of like rush to get that out there. It didn't stay away from AI, but it was like, okay, I mean, well, we have a new virtual reality headset coming out. Oh, are those also passe right now? Oh, dang. Okay. So, but from what I heard from this, from what I read at least in this Bloomberg report about the upcoming WWDC for Apple, is that it seems that what Apple wants to do with AI pretty soon is try to focus more on what is extremely applicable for their consumers or what can be done for like people who really like Apple products. And I think it'll be a way to, it'll be a lot of like work software assists and also ways to like, kind of ease the interoperability of different products within the Apple ecosystem. So it could end up being consumer focused more, and maybe that will be ultimately the more, right and maybe less embarrassing tack to take with this stuff,
Yeah,
especially,
yeah.
at a time when Google can, put up some demonstration and it's wrong and it tanks their stock price,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and look, I from as an Apple user, I don't have any problems with them using AI to improve the quality of Siri, so that Siri understands who I'm trying to text when I use voice commands or whatever, and doesn't text my barber about my dinner. So look, so I'm in favor of that sort of consumer focus, but I guess your piece makes more of it almost makes a kind of aesthetic argument that Apple has gone from being this sort of countercultural thing. We think about the famous Ridley Scott 1984 advert, has gone from that sort of sense of breaking the mainstream, being very like a very aesthetic product um, design, and gone into something into almost being uncool. Um, and you kind of point to this list of the Apple 100 albums, um, which again, I always, I think back to that time that Apple released an iPod that was like preloaded with U2 songs, I think, which is maybe the
Oh
least
yeah, yeah.
cool product ever invented.
The automatic U2 album gets installed into it, right? Yeah, I remember.
And that was at the time when the iPod was the coolest thing in town, and they did something so deeply uncool. But so is it actually really fair to say that Apple is entering a kind of new period of sort of like some kind of self-conscious dad vibes?
That's a great question. I do think that in terms of the coolness factor, one thing that has really continued to play well in their favor is just the fact of having a iMessage and the blue bubbles versus the green bubbles thing. That has continued to make it, a pretty preferred communication outlet of choice for a lot of users. But
Well, you guys in America, you guys use iMessage all the time. No one, I mean, in the UK, everyone uses WhatsApp, and
mhm.
apparently, very few Americans use WhatsApp. In here, it's completely
Yeah,
ubiquitous.
because I
But
mean, right, iMessage has a lot of like the same sort of encrypted abilities, or at least they say they do.
mhm.
But yeah, I mean, as someone who owns a Samsung phone, I'm always kind of like the guy in my friends group chats, like who's with the green bubble, who does not get the, whenever someone likes my message, I get it as a separate message and so on. But I think even that sort of exclusivity and sort of like, self-branding factor is perhaps under threat now with these antitrust suits from the US federal government, and also, some of the new regulations that have come out of the EU. If they if the government's managed to successfully make the case that like look, the way you were doing this, is also pretty like anti-competitive and serves a larger goal of you mainly wanting to stick people in your like just only buying Apple products instead of like, being interoperable with other products that could work better for other means, then I mean, you if you lose that branding, then I think you start to really get into deeply uncool territory.
Mm, mm. On top of the uncoolness factor, you talk about this kind of late adopter factor. They were late to streaming music. They got beaten out by Spotify there. They were very late to the streaming video party, even though I think there is a perception that Apple TV Plus is pretty decent offering, at least here in the UK. It doesn't get dunked on quite as much as many of the streaming services. And then there's the Vision Pro, which again feels like it just missed the timing on that. I've never put one on, but again, the piece suggests that they've been it's been a big failure. Is this just a cyclical thing that right now Apple seems a little bit behind, but ultimately with a company the size of Apple, sometimes it's going to turn very slowly like a big cruise ship, but ultimately it is a big cruise ship, and when it sets its direction, it can plow a new course to confuse the metaphor.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's dependent on, whether executives, shareholders, leaders at Apple in general, want to try to continue to be, once a very culture driving innovative force that they once were. I mean, it seems like for like the past, I'd say probably decade now, I mean, they seem to have been pretty content to rest on just like their laurels of being the Apple brand and having put out the iPhone, which is very popular. So they're just like, okay, yeah, why fix what's broken? We're just gonna put an iPhone with a better camera, or like an iPhone with a this sort of like a memory and other like technical capability. But sorry, could you repeat your question? I lost.
Yeah, I mean, look, just to come back to that, but like, just to pick up on what you were saying, there is, you can, if you've got a product like the iPhone, in a sense, it makes sense to just keep iterating, keep making it better. The price point of the iPhone is so insane to me, but people still buy it. Every year people trade in their old iPhones. It's very hard to know exactly how Apple would be avant-garde at present unless it did something like Vision Pro, which is obviously the perceived next frontier. These goggles that allow you to see the whole world, but it doesn't seem like there's actually an active consumer market for them at present. Um, so I'm a little bit not to defend Apple, because they have better pay, they employ people to do that, but I'm also a little bit like, how does Apple be avant-garde in this current marketplace when they've made just about the only avant-garde piece of hardware I can conceive of, and basically it just feels like the public isn't ready for it yet.
Mhm. No, that's a really good way of putting it. And I think again it depends on what the team at Apple's actual goals are, going forward, whether they're really keeping track of like certain trends and tech and research and consumer sentiment or desire or otherwise. I mean, I think those are the things that really helped it be so strong in putting something extremely new out there. But now it seems and Apple's far from the only tech company to go this route, but a lot of what it has wanted to do, I think, in more recent years is kind of just like lock in its own like a Appleverse and lock in its customers and just kind of keep squeezing in the little revenue buttons and sources wherever they can get them. So it's like, okay, we want to make this other product easy to work with this new iPhone, which by the way will also work great with this pay feature and so on. It's like making more of the Apple brand itself, kind of like your lifestyle, ultimate consumer choice, which works for a lot of people. I mean, there's a reason, it's still pretty popular, but yeah, like when it comes to anything they've like, again, they've had to like play catch up on so many other trends that have, kind of snuck up on them. I would agree that Apple TV Plus is a pretty decent service, but pretty cool offerings, and they've backed some great movies like Killers of the Flower Moon, such. But they, I mean, they're also like what, the 20th such like major streaming service to come along these days. Apple Music obviously has like a decent market share, but you know, because of its extreme, paid for model and iPhone exclusive sort of thing, it's never going to be able to have that sort of universality that a more independent app like Spotify can have, right? I think Apple has almost just like locked itself too much into itself for its own good, almost, because it's like, all right, we made this Appleverse, starting with the Macintosh. We just want to keep people in there instead of like trying to reach out or get more people into the Apple ecosystem who may not have been there before.
Yeah. There was certainly this. There used to be this. Apple emerged as a sort of insurgent and sort of challenging Microsoft and IBM and all of that. And then they developed this idea of kind of like people in Portland or Seattle, kind of at a Starbucks on their MacBook. Getting out their iPod. Then the iPhone, then the Apple Watch. It became a sort of lifestyle brand, as you allude to. And obviously, that is now probably seen as deeply uncool to be like heavily invested in the kind of the Apple ecosystem, the Apple cinematic universe. Apple is a company with the market capitalization of a sort of a bank, and we talk about financial institutions as too big to fail. I wonder if it's simply a case of Apple now having gone through that insurgent period, gone through that countercultural period, now being too big to be cool.
Yeah, that's an extremely good point. I mean, yeah, a lot of innovation is risky, right? And at this point, when Apple has made its way to being one of the, just top companies, you don't want to lose that spot, right? You don't want to lose that competitiveness, and a lot of what shareholders, traders, other people are looking for, they're not maybe not necessarily looking for this innovation factor or that. They're just looking for money. Like and Apple doesn't need like a VC cash infusion, obviously. If anything, it can, just like kind of choose where to direct its dollars, whom to support, right? Um, so like it's it it is harder to be the counterculture again when you are the culture. Like, at this point, like, the iPhone is ubiquitous enough that at least in America and a lot of other places that it is just like for a lot of people it's just like their phone. They don't even necessarily have to call it their iPhone. They just call it their phone. But I think again this misses out, and you've seen this in other countries, especially in Asia, where Apple has failed to make as much of a like deep imprint as other as it has in America, because you're like, again, you're not only convincing those users, many of whom are probably acclimated to different products, to come to Apple, but it's like when you come to Apple, you have to come to everything Apple. Like, you're almost being invited to the Apple Club. And
Yeah.
that club is still, at least for the very, for the time being, like it's not even, yeah, like if it's cool even anymore, it's just kind of a status symbol, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, look at me, I've got all these nice sleek products in my garage. Don't ask me how much I paid for them.
Yeah, yeah, and look, it's if you compare Apple with Tesla, which is in a way is a comparison that's not completely facile. I mean, Elon Musk works very hard to make Tesla seem countercultural, and at the expense often of Tesla's stock price. Pretending, and that's still a kind of first. I mean, the Apple has been expedited along its journey by the fact that Steve Jobs died, and it's now no longer a first generation founder run company in the way that Tesla is still run as a kind of private fiefdom. Apple is now just a corporate behemoth. Finally, just before I let you go, you're kind of your tech and your business reporter. there's the kind of old saying that you never go broke betting on Apple, the safest stock in town. Uh, is that a truism that holds up in the 2024 and onwards era? Do you think?
Um, it's a great question. I mean, I would say, a lot of the big drivers in the stock market lately, especially like, I mean, a lot of them have been tech stocks, big tech companies, and they've been companies, that have something to do with AI, right? I mean, Nvidia now is all of a sudden like this juggernaut because it's making the hardware that powers a lot of this stuff. Um, so I mean, if I think Apple for the near future probably like remains a safe bet just to see in terms of like, you know, what they're doing, how comfortable they remain in their ecosystem and their status and power. But I would not bank on Apple being able to continue any sort of its innovative edge anytime soon. And I mean, if you were an Apple fan and you were trying to look for other places that, might have that edge that Apple once had, I would recommend looking at the companies that Apple now partners with to get its stuff done. I mean, there's a reason that it's partnering with OpenAI instead of bringing on its own in-house team to compete with OpenAI, right?
Okay, so that's a word of caution to people who have bet their pensions on on Apple continuing its conquest.